now that we finished the distributist, I think it's about time that we start talking about the School of Life and some more cringe that was posted by them of me exposing someone in the background. Yeah, that was my roommate. But so now I'm gonna talk up next about the video by School of Life titled "The History of Capitalism." History of Ideas, Capitalism, and I don't know if he knows he's being streamed, but he's probably fine with it. He's on the internet as well, but whatever. So let's. I don't think he made it in this YouTube video though, so we're fine. He's just in the stream. It's a stream exclusive. There we go. But History of Ideas, Capitalism. So this is kind of framed just as a nice historical piece. Let's see if there's any bias. See what they got for us here. Oh no, Grisio Lepis is still in here. Mega Miner, the ultimate doxer. Uh-oh. Now I'm a little scared for my roommate out there.
Today, pretty much every economy in the world is organized along capitalist lines. But at the same time, capitalism is almost everywhere regarded with disappointment,
Ah, yes. All the great capitalist nations of this planet. Where are they at, though?
Frustration and suspicion. Interestingly, none of the criticisms are new. They've been dogging capitalism since its inception. So let's look back in time to figure out.
Note at the beginning of this History of Ideas, Capitalism, they're just talking about the history of capitalism. They're like, oh, everyone's disappointed with capitalism and the way that it's been destroying the world. Not failing to mention that what we have now is nowhere near a laissez-faire capitalist system. And I would say laissez-faire capitalism is what capitalism is. What we have now is a bunch of mixed economies and fairly fascist economies, to be honest, if we look at the definition of fascist economy, which is essentially the idea that it's the state and economics being mixed together, where the state basically regulates the fuck out of companies, basically to enforce that they basically follow the dictates of the state and direct themselves toward the will of the people. That's sort of how a lot of economies are structured right now, especially America's, with our heavy regulation and very close interactions between big business and the government in the way that they write regulations and do those sort of things. So we're a lot closer to a fascist economy than a capitalist one.
How capitalism got its bad name and what might be done to improve it. Padua, Italy, 1304. On the wall of a church in Padua near Venice, the painter Giotto makes a fresco, Jesus and the Moneylenders. It restates for his own times an idea that had by then already been well established.
This video sounds kind of quiet. Let me know if it's too quiet for you guys.
Centuries in the West. The notion that a good spiritual life and the pursuit of business and money are sworn enemies. Jesus goes to the temple in Jerusalem, sees merchants and small-time bankers crowding the forecourt, and gets furious. This sacred place is not a fitting arena for the polluting.
Yeah, see, this is one problem with Christianity, and it's interesting how Christians are the only defenders of capitalism now, when Jesus, their founder, is very against the merchants and very against capitalism.
Activities of buying and selling. The Christian attack on the immorality of money is deeply influential and severely holds back the development of capitalism for centuries.
And the development of society as well. Christianity is very opposed to the creation of wealth, and ultimately that led to the Christians not doing usury, Christians not running banks back during the Middle Ages, which led to a certain group of people rising up in the banking industry and them being treated with a lot of suspicion because all bankers are evil, and this one group of people seems to be banking quite a bit, and from there we see a lot of suspicion of that specific group from the Christians.
Venice, 1450. A Franciscan friar, Luca Pacioli, publishes the first ever book on accounting, Summa de Arithmetica. It's the single most important capitalist invention until the birth of the joint stock company and the modern factory. In the book, Pacioli introduces the principle of double-entry bookkeeping, which gradually becomes standard practice in all companies. Pacioli's textbook proposes that dealing well with money doesn't depend on fate anymore. Money isn't a divine punishment or reward, it's a kind of science that can be learnt through patience, reason, and hard work. Geneva, 1555. In powerful sermons to his congregations in Geneva, the Protestant theologian John Calvin emphasizes to his Swiss audiences the importance of what have become known as the Protestant virtues: hard work, self-denial, patience, honesty, and duty. These will turn out to be extremely useful qualities for capitalism.
Yeah, see, this is how the Christians began to be the ones that are associated with capitalism, but the issue is, like, ever since Jesus, you see that capitalism is treated with a lot of suspicion, and the altruism of Christianity leads to a lot of that suspicion. So even among these virtues being promoted, there's still like a sort of skepticism of it, because they're very opposed to the self-interest of capitalists, which I'm sure we'll see later on in the video. I'm not 100%.
Calvin, along with many other preachers who share his outlook, explains that you must never indulge yourself nor spend money having a lavish life.
See, there you go. They're pro, like, hard work, pro all those sort of things, which are like values of capitalism, but then you can't receive the rewards of those things. So you're supposed to work hard sort of as an intrinsic value rather than to gain the rewards of the things and to live a happy life. You do it in an almost self-sacrificial way. And this is not how capitalism functions. When in a capitalist system, there's this thing called property rights, and property rights say that if you take certain actions, you get the results of those actions. If you create a business, you get to own that business. But fundamentally, this idea that you don't get to improve your state of living and increase your happiness and live a lavish life, as he's explaining, is what leads to the downfall of capitalism. And it leads to a lot of people being skeptical of it because they see a lot of people living lavish lives because of capitalism, which I would argue is good. People pursuing their self-interest, living a better life, improving their standard of living. So yeah. Where's my cursor? There it is.
You must simply put any surplus income back into your business as an investment. Calvin adds that being good at business is far more pleasing in the sight of God than being an aristocratic warrior or even a monk. Perhaps more than technology, it's this new mindset that will accelerate the progress of capitalism. 1670, Delft, Dutch Republic. The newly independent Dutch Republic is the world's first explicitly capitalist nation, where lazy...
Hey, the Dutch. Shout out Juno.
Aristocrats are looked down upon and hard-working merchants revered. In the churches, Protestant sermons about thrift and hard work are heard. In the arts, out go glorifications of kings and queens. Johannes Vermeer finishes painting The Lace Maker, a depiction of the intricate, careful and homely tasks of manufacturing lace.
That's amazing. It's a replacement of all this like aristocrats and power and all those sort of things with just hard work, productivity, which is absolutely amazing because those are more virtuous than just being born into aristocracy. Obviously, it's a lot more virtuous to be a productive person and to be able to, because productivity is fundamentally what leads to you being able to further live, because you need to take actions to survive. You need to do things. You need to produce things in order to survive. And productivity is therefore a virtue, because if your own survival, your own life is your standard of value, productivity being the means of achieving it makes that a pretty important virtue.
In his painting The Little Street, the suggestion is that living peacefully and quietly in your own home, running a business, is far more glamorous and noble than fighting in a war or going to a monastery.
Absolutely.
1776, 141 The Strand, London. These are the offices and shop of Strain and Cadell, publishers who have a big success with a new book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, written by a Scottish philosopher called Adam Smith. Smith demystifies wealth creation by explaining how
Adam Smith is pretty great. He invented the whole idea of the invisible hand and how acting in your self-interest can promote like a development in society, but still throughout it he is very dismissive of self-interest, and he is not a big fan of people acting in their self-interest, which once again leads to the downfall of capitalism. Later, it leads to people being extremely skeptical of it, because how can people acting in their self-interest, this negative thing, be responsible for good in the world, be responsible for the growth and the wealth of nations? It seems like there's this common trend here. It's capitalism, this system, or like productivity, these things are being propped up on really weak foundations, like Calvinism. It's, yeah, you want to be productive, but you can't achieve the rewards of that production. You want to just live a simple life. Don't be lavish. Don't achieve anything with it, but just be productive. Work hard. And then here it's capitalism's great, but your self-interest is capitalism is great because when you act in your self-interest, this negative thing, it makes your life, it makes the world a lot better, but your self-interest is bad. So there's this inherent contradiction in the beginning of the intellectual development of capitalism.
Capitalist economies grow. He reaches several important conclusions. Slavery is remarkably inefficient. Violence is less of an incentive than money for a worker, and the cost of buying and maintaining slaves far exceeds the cost of wages. Capitalists will make far more money by treating their workers legally and humanely. It's by specializing that economies grow, says Smith. Smith focuses on the pin-making industry and concludes that while one worker could make up to 20 pins a day, a team of 10 workers well arranged could make not 200 but 48,000 pins, thanks to what Smith terms the division of labor. Smith also tells us that capitalism is guided by an invisible hand. By maximizing one's own profit, individuals inadvertently benefit society, providing goods that people want and need. As Smith puts it, it is...
Yeah, this isn't some like mystical invisible hand. This is just the fact that in order to be profitable, you have to provide things that people want. You have to meet demands in society, which improves society as such, because when you meet demands of society, people's standards of living go up because they get things that they want. They achieve their values a lot better. And that's really the only way to be profitable in a free system. Now, there's other ways to be profitable in a mixed economy. You can do basically whatever you want and just get in good favors with the government, because then the government won't let you fail. But this has a problem. It distorts the economy by diverting resources into less valuable industries that are gonna fail most likely, or industries that would fail in a capitalist system, industries of goods that people don't actually want, that aren't actually demanded. And this leads to great distortions in the economy. And when these want to correct, you get things like depressions. When they inevitably correct, you get things like depressions. Now, what our government does when these things happen is it continues to prop up those industries. You see with like bailouts, and you see with stimulus packages and those sort of things. It just props them right back up to get that demand back up. Got to get the aggregate demand backed up right now. But what we really need is for the free market to just figure it out, and it's going to be painful. But if you want to have a stable economy, we need to correct here. Otherwise, you're just going to, the problem's just going to keep building upon itself and getting worse and worse. When the inevitable crash comes, it's going to be a lot more painful than what it would have been.
Not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. These ideas further remove the moral suspicion that once surrounds capitalism, but not all will be won over. 1854.
Oh yeah, and I know the invisible hand's a metaphor, but a lot of people think it's just like this mystical thing that, like on both sides, some people say like the invisible hand, that's God, and then leftists are like, oh, this invisible hand, whatever that is, this abstract concept that doesn't exist.
London. The British economy is now the largest in the world, thanks to its enormous industries of cotton, shipbuilding, steel and coal. Vast cities have chewed up the countryside of the Midlands and northern England. Merchants and the new...
Vast cities chewed up the countryside. I mean, cities are beautiful. Cities make living a lot easier. When you're living on the countryside without any technological advancement and very hard, grueling work, and away from grocery stores, away from civilization, your life is a lot more difficult. Now, people have this weird view that cities are ugly and they make the countryside less beautiful, but I don't know if you ever seen a beautiful skyline. I would beg to differ. Let's look up Dubai skyline. Let's look at that. Ah, yes, these disgusting cities eating up the landscape. Let's see if it loads. So disgusting, so nasty. They're just destroying this beautiful desert land of Dubai. Yeah, shut up. You don't know shit. Eating up the beautiful landscape. Shut the fuck up.
Newly rich capitalist class have triumphed, but many are furious. Charles Dickens, one of Victorian England's most passionate critics of unrestrained capitalism, publishes a novel, Hard Times. Set in the fictional town of Coketown, a version of Manchester,
Charles
it takes
Dickens
aim at
cringe.
heartless capitalists like Mr. Gradgrind, who abuse their workers, exploit young children in mines and chimneys, and use their relentless capitalist logic to blind them to their desecration of nature and human life.
Oh God, there's holy fuck. There's a lot to say about that. Well, for one, they're improving the standards of living of these people, because what would they be doing otherwise? They'd be starving on subsistence farms. The children would be dying if they weren't working in those factories. They're like child mortality fell off during this time. Now the factory conditions were kind of bad, yes, but we have to start somewhere. In order to get there. And over time, we realize that as we see with all the information about child labor, like it begins to fall really quickly, and it eventually reaches. Let's go to America. Eventually reaches very low levels before there's any child labor laws even passed. So let's look at this. This is the percent of child labor, like 16. Let's just look at both sexes. 12% all the way down. Eventually 1930, where it's like 2%. So people are getting out of these factories around the 1930s and essentially out of it. So like, let's look up when were the first child labor laws passed. When were child labor laws passed? I've looked this up before, so I know what the answer is. 1938. This is after it's already essentially lowered down to zero. So the thing here is capitalism, it used child labor at the beginning, sure, but what it did, it raised these children's standard of living by having them work in the factories rather than dying on the farms, and eventually move them out into schools. So capitalism's legacy, instead of being that it put children into factories and made children work, it should be that it took the children off the farms and eventually, over the course of 100 years, got them into schools. That is the legacy of capitalism. And the other point, he said the words capitalist logic, which is such a clear Marxist idea, that there's like this idea that the bourgeois have this certain method of thinking dictated by their material conditions that lead to them being oppressive towards the workers, which is absolutely absurd and extremely deterministic. Anyone who has a basic conception of the fact that free will exists understands the problems with this. But Marxism is very, very deterministic based on materialism.
Here is Dickens writing on Coketown. It was a town of red brick, or of brick that would have been red if the smoke and ashes had allowed it, but as matters stood, it was a town of unnatural red and black like the painted face of a savage. Dickens argues that capitalism is evil because it encourages appalling conditions for the producers. Under the sway of capitalist logic, otherwise quite nice people will keep coming up with reasons why it's okay to employ a child in a factory or to let poor people starve once they've reached the end of their working lives.
Oh my God, these are the it's such a backwards and terrible framing of the situation. These are the people that brought children off of the farms and gave people better lives by bringing them into cities and giving them jobs that were better than what they had before. So like this whole idea that it was like you're giving these people terrible conditions and making their lives worse. There was no obligation for them to come and work here. They could have continued working on their farms and starving on the farms. But no, these capitalists provided new opportunities for these people, and people rushed to the cities for these new opportunities. This new chance to make their lives better for the first time in all of human history, where people had, for the first time, had the ability to improve their own standard of living and to work for someone and engage in a division of labor to improve their lives.
1860, London. the English reformer John Ruskin publishes Unto This Last, a furious tract against capitalism that takes aim not so much at the production side of capitalism as the area of consumption. Like Dickens, Ruskin is incensed that people are being exploited and the environment ruined, but he asks a further question: in the name of what? Ruskin notes that large capitalist fortunes are built up on selling people absurd things: knickknacks, fancy plates, embroidered napkins, bonnets, carved sideboards, the whole of the suffering of the cotton.
Absurd things. These are things that people want. These are things that people desire. This is the first time that people can buy luxury goods because they don't, think about this. Before, all people's time, all people's effort, all people's resources were devoted to was food and water and mere subsistence. But now people have those things. These things are readily available to them through the capitalist system and division of labor. So now they can move on and buy more luxurious items because they see better things that they want, and they can buy dresses to make themselves look more beautiful, or buy these decorative items to make their houses look nicer, rather than simply caring about the basic needs of survival. They can begin to pursue more values besides food and water, which I find to be amazing. But this person looks down at it and scoffs at it like, "Oh, do you really need that? You don't really need a corset or a bonnet," or who are you to tell them that? Who are you to look down at them and say, you don't need these luxury items? You're trying to improve your standard of living. Go back on the farm. We don't want you to have all these nice things that you want. You guys are weird. You guys are fucking weird. Go back to the farm and work for your living.
Factories of Manchester are being fed by our appetite for very cheap shirts with delicate collars. We are ruining our lives for trinkets. Whereas for Ruskin, money shouldn't only be made morally, it should be spent morally, on the truly noble and beautiful things that humans need. He contrasts the beauty of Venice with the ugliness of modern Britain to make his point.
Holy fuck. Things that people truly need. What is he talking about here? They're not concretizing what it means. Are they talking about food? Well, people have the food they need now, so they can begin to buy other things. Is he talking about art? Is he saying that people aren't consuming high-end art now? Well, they're not wealthy yet. There's a transition period. People can't go from subsistence to wealth, to extreme wealth overnight. But nowadays we can buy all sorts of beautiful things. Most people can afford a piece of art or two.
Berlin, 1963. The leader of communist East Germany, Walter Ulbricht, launches an ambitious new scheme, the Neues Ökonomisches System, or NOS. It aims to solve for East Germans the two major failings of capitalism in his eyes. One, it will guarantee workers good conditions, with a huge expansion in the number of state schools, housing blocks and holiday camps. And secondly, it will focus not on the fripperies of capitalist production, like blue jeans and pop music. It will give people the works of Plato and Marx and uplifting television programs about tractor production.
Jesus Christ. What the... yes. Let us replace...
housing blocks and holiday camps. And secondly, it will focus not on the fripperies of capitalist production, like blue jeans and pop music.
Yes. Let us replace blue jeans and pop music with Socrates, Marx, and tractors. Tractor programs on television. Jesus Christ. It will give people the
works of Plato and Marx and uplifting television programs about tractor production.
Is this satire? Uplifting programs about tractor production. This degenerate pop music and these degenerate blue jeans. Let us go back to Socrates and Marx and tractors. Uplifting films about tractor production.
1976, Dresden, East Germany. The fatal flaws of communism come to a head in January with a massive riot about the unavailability of coffee. East Germans love drinking coffee, but a huge rise in global prices means that the German Democratic Republic can no longer afford to import it in the necessary quantities. The Politburo decides to remove all coffee from shops and replaces it with Mischkaffee, mixed coffee, which is 51% coffee and 49% a range of fillers including chicory, rye and sugar beet. Dissatisfaction with this eventually has to be quelled with the use of the Stasi or secret police. It's an inadvertent tribute to capitalism, which is especially good at providing us with life's little luxuries. Edeka hypermarket near
Wait, they're blaming that on capitalism? Because things got expensive in a communist country, so they replaced it with a worse product. That's capitalism's fault? Capitalism is what made these things available to begin with. Is it because they had it and now they're mad that they don't have it anymore because of communism? Oh my god. Oh, these entitled people, they wanted their coffee, but now that capitalism's gone, they can't get it anymore, and now they're mad. Like, holy fuck. Just be complacent with what you have. You can't desire any more. If you want any more, you're just entitled. You don't deserve it. You don't deserve to have any more than subsistence. You don't deserve any more than just the basics.
Hamburg, November 1989. East Germans who have recently breached the wall head straight for West German supermarkets like Edeka near Hamburg. They marvel at the productive capacities of capitalism and at the ability that it has to provide such modest but very important things as olive oil, party hats, iced buns and coffee. The old East German elite who had believed that the people could be satisfied with philosophy, athletics, sauerkraut and TV programs about farming are hounded out of office.
Good.
1999, Seattle, USA. The World Trade Organization, a capitalist body dedicated to removing protection from industry and liberalizing markets, gets together for its next round of talks, 10 years since the fall of communism and after a decade of unprecedented economic growth. But though the mood of politicians is upbeat, out in the streets hundreds of thousands of anti-capitalist protesters have gathered to call an end to the iniquities of global capitalism. The complaints are strikingly similar to those made by Jesus Christ. Capitalism doesn't look after the producers, and capitalism downgrades the important spiritual ends of life for the sake of hamburgers, unsustainably cheap clothes, and garish, distracting mass media. With their beards and gaunt figures.
Or what about all the books that we can buy a lot cheaper that can help us with our spiritual development? Or the courses we can take online that help us with our spiritual development? I don't know. There's all sorts of different things that improve our ability to think because of capitalism. It's not just cheeseburgers and fucking whatever the other thing you said was.
Many of the protesters look a little like Renaissance renditions of Jesus. The police take a very heavy hand, fire tear gas into the crowds, arrest 2,000, and call in the National Guard. The protests remind the world that besides the winners of capitalism, there is an enormous army of the disenfranchised and the angry, who see more sense in Jesus, Dickens, and Ruskin than in Adam Smith and Bill Clinton. 2015.
Bill Clinton, the great representative of capitalism. Holy fuck. Yeah, people are discontented with our modern society, obviously, but they're misinterpreting the root of that. The root is the mixed economy. The root is allowing government into our economy.
Cupertino, California. Apple Computers officially becomes the largest corporation in the world. It's a giant success story, but the very same challenges remain. It turns out that Apple are indirectly responsible for the suffering and abuse of workers in the supply chain in China via the Foxconn Corporation. And with the launch of the...
This is the same thing as the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. You can't just immediately hop from subsistence farms to super high development overnight. It's just, you can't do it. The Soviet Union tried, but they had so many famines. They invested so much in development and industrialization that it wasn't actually what the people needed, and they sacrificed food and resources that the people needed at the time. You can't make an overnight transition. It simply doesn't work like that. But what capitalism is doing in those areas is pulling people off of subsistence farms and putting them into factories, which the factories aren't perfect, obviously not. But there is a necessary transition period. Causality still exists. Reality is what it is. And you can't completely change that by expecting these people to get up to our standard of living overnight. That's simply not how reality works.
Apple Watch, a gadget that seems to have no particularly urgent purpose, questions are once again raised about why we're exhausting ourselves and the planet for ends that are so out of proportion with the costs they impose on all of us. To generalize, capitalism is amazingly productive, but it has two big flaws. Firstly, it's systematically inclined to ignore the sufferings of workers unless regularly prodded not to. And the wealth of companies is often built up on satisfying what are not the essential needs of human beings.
They do satisfy the essential needs of human beings primarily. And the thing about the workers is it's raising up the standard of living of these workers prior to where they were before. That's what capitalism does. It creates goods that are more luxurious over time, and it raises workers to higher echelons of society over time. And those trends sort of travel together, because once you have the basic needs met, then you can move on to more luxurious things, and you can improve worker standard of living, and it sort of builds up, because you can't sell things that are more expensive than what people want, or things that aren't what people want in general. If people need food, you can't try to sell them Apple Watches. But the thing is people do have food right now. People aren't starving constantly in America. Now in China, and also people's standards of living increase, they can get better jobs as well as society gains more wealth. However, in China, they don't have a lot of wealth yet. They're still trying to meet the subsistence needs. They're still trying to develop a market. They're still trying to industrialize, and they're obviously not there yet. But over time, we'll see more and more they begin to industrialize more and more, and they'll begin to buy more luxury goods, and the conditions of their factories will get better and better, and eventually they'll reach a point that we're at now as well. And it's just continual growth, and that's how it works. The human needs are infinite, and the human mind has an infinite capacity to create and produce. And because of that, we will continue to grow.
Fortunes are made on making unhealthy food or bad television programs. The challenge for the future is how we might be able to make money humanely by treating people and the earth well, and also make money through activities which address the more noble end of human needs. Till then, the rage of Jesus in
there's like this denigration of superficiality in this video. They hate the idea that people could want something just to like ease their mind, just to pass the time, just to relax, something superficial to engage in. They disdain that fact. It's almost like they expect people to just constantly read and think and do like super focused work constantly all the time. But no, that's not necessarily the case. That's not how people are going to behave. People aren't going to work constantly. People aren't going to read constantly. There's other things to life than that. There's leisure that you can engage in that makes life more meaningful as well. Your mind can only do so much. Your mind has a identity as well. It has a nature as well. You can't overexert it, because then it's going to get exhausted, and you're not going to be living a happy, relaxed life. Along with focus and along with knowledge, there's another important aspect of life that one must achieve, and that's peace. You need to be relaxed. You can't, as someone who's super anxious is not going to live a happy life as either. And when you're simply reading constantly and constantly focusing on super intense, deep philosophical thought, you're not actually going to be living a peaceful life. You're just going to be super on edge, and you're going to be super mentally exhausted, and you're just going to force yourself to strive through it some more, which is really dangerous and leads to a lot of anxiety.
The temple will periodically always go on.
Google Fi, a phone plan by Google. It's easy to switch to Fi from the comfort of your home.
Oh, there we go. Now that one's done. I am very tired. 2 videos. I haven't streamed in a while. Holy shit. But for those of you on YouTube, go like, comment, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and go support me on Patreon as well. So we'll probably end this one now, and bye, YouTube.